How's it going, you guys? So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about Paul Saladino appearing on the Joe Rogan show yesterday, actually. So it's been a long time coming. You've had people like, what was his name? Dr. Sean Baker, come on Joe Rogan back in like 2018, which caused the carnivore explosion. Then you have people like Frank Tufano, who was crying and complaining because he's jealous that he didn't get called on Joe Rogan because no one likes Frank, because Frank Tufano is a complete liar, um, and a crybaby and a drama queen. And, if Joe Rogan did put him on his podcast, then Frank Tufano would probably go behind his back and start talking crap about him immediately after, just like he did every other one of his friends. But anyway. My opinion on Paul Saladino being on the Joe Rogan show. Awesome stuff. It's been a long time coming. Lots and lots of people would benefit from seeing the information that Paul Saladino has. So in the podcast, Paul spent the first 10 minutes or so just like breaking down why plant foods might actually be harmful to humans. Now, it's kind of unfortunate. I'm a bit disappointed because he didn't get to go into detail as to the main reason why the removing plant toxins is so important for some people. He didn't go into detail on autoimmune disease being the most important thing that the carnivore diet tends to fix. So the main reason why so many people try the carnivore diet is because they have extreme digestive problems, whether that's SIBO, whether that's irritable bowel syndrome, or they have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or they have even things like gout seems to get better on a carnivore diet, usually because it's the high amounts of refined carbs that tend to cause that. Crohn's disease, what else? Fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis. There's a wide variety of autoimmune illness and other conditions that mainstream medicine is completely dumbfounded on that get better on a carnivore diet. And one of the main reasons why that's probably the case, it probably has to do with these plant toxins, maybe certain plant toxins, certain lectins, certain, maybe they're sensitive to oxalates. There's compounds in these plants that can be affecting certain individuals who have intolerances to it. Now, not everybody's going to react to all plants the same way. For example, myself, I have problems with whole grains and beans, nuts and seeds, but I can eat tubers and fruits and leafy greens and most regular vegetables and fruits just fine. Whereas other people can't eat anything without having these autoimmune conditions. And so Paul Saladino in the first 10 minutes did pretty good talking about anti-nutrients and things, but I noticed down in the comments, because I started getting lost in the conversation about Chef Bourdain, Anthony Bourdain, and like foie gras and a bunch of other stuff. People in the comments didn't seem to understand. This is a main complaint I have about this, is just that Joe Rogan's audience, a lot of them seem to be just baboons. Like, they don't have the capacity for critical thinking. Lots of comments on there were about Joe Rogan being in an echo chamber and Paul Saladino not being a dietitian, which I think is funny because when he has a dietitian on, they might say, oh, he's not a medical doctor. But now they have a medical doctor on, and I guess it's because Paul Saladino doesn't have MD or doctor in his name in the title of the video, and he didn't mention he's a medical doctor on the podcast. So these people don't even know who Paul Saladino is. And they're just saying he's full of crap and all this, even though Paul Saladino was citing studies the whole time, having Jamie pull him up from the folders, and discussing, intervention trials that showed no benefit from fruits and vegetables. Now, obviously, or even like benefits of removing vegetables. So I'm not against plant consumption, but I think it's ridiculous how many people in the comments were, they're saying, oh, I could smell the cognitive dissonance from over here. And it's like, if you actually spend the time to write a comment about cognitive dissonance, it sounds like chances are whatever video it is that you're commenting on probably triggered some cognitive dissonance in you. And so you're projecting that onto someone else because you don't agree. So, just too much people on there spouting their nonsense. And to me, that's worrisome. But otherwise, the whole podcast is great. It's just pretty much, if you've been following Paul Saladino for a long time, you've already heard everything. He says, polyunsaturated fats, linoleic acid, omega-6, vegetable oils, chicken fat. That's like the main thing driving most diseases over the last 100 years, according to Paul. Honey is okay, but grains are bad, according to Paul. If you're going to eat plants, tubers and fruits are acceptable. Then he talks about the study done on hunter-gatherer tribes. I think was it the Tasmania people, where they're eating like large amounts of tubers, but they wouldn't eat leaves and yada yada. Plant toxins, plant nutrients, how red meat won't kill you, the difference between, correlation and causation and population studies and intervention trials, like pretty much the normal Paul Saladino stuff was all throughout the podcast. So, if you've been following Paul Saladino, I don't really need to comment on the things he covered. It's the same thing, but he just did a really good job of presenting the information. He was on his A game here in this podcast, other than Joe kind of like diverting the subject there for a little bit at the beginning of the podcast. But they covered a lot of things. It's a 3-hour podcast. I just wish that when people hear this, they don't think, like there was a comment like, oh, hunter-gatherers, they have a 20-year life expectancy, so I wouldn't call them the epitome of health. Well, obviously these people haven't actually looked into why that's irrelevant. The fact that infant mortality was so high because, hunter-gatherers, they weren't born in hospitals, man. Like, there was a lot of death at birth. They were losing a lot of their babies, and the same thing happens in third world countries, because they don't have experts helping with the childbirth. And then, of course, they're out there drinking water out of lakes and stuff, so you got all these pathogens and viruses and parasites, not to mention they're not exactly civilized cultures. There's a high risk of getting eaten by, like wolves and carnivorous animals and things. Like these people who say, oh, they had a low life expectancy. They're clearly very underread and undereducated, and that's a lot of the comments I was seeing on Joe Rogan's thing. But fact is, millions of people now have been exposed to not just like the basics of the carnivore diet, but the science behind it. That's why I like Paul Saladino, and why I'm more excited that Paul Saladino came on Joe Rogan than these other carnivore people, because nobody knows the science behind plant toxins and a carnivore style approach. No one knows it better than Paul. He's the most well-read, most scientifically sound carnivore diet advocate that there is on the internet. And a lot of people can benefit from his information. And, I saw a couple comments on there saying that Paul stole all of his knowledge, everything he knows, from Frank Tufano. And again, it's just what is that? Dunning-Kruger effect. Like, these people, they don't know what they don't know. They watch Frank Tufano and immediately assume that everything Frank Tufano says is the truth for some reason. Frank is this crazy science expert, even though he has no background in science. He's only been on YouTube since 2018. He's constantly lying about everything. He's on steroids now. And for some reason, people can't see the obvious. And then, you have Paul Saladino, who's a medical doctor. He's been practicing as a medical doctor for, I think, 10, 15 years now. He's debated Lane Norton. He has debated Chris Masterjohn. Stephen Gundry. I mean, Paul Saladino is the man. So I'm extremely grateful that he's on Joe Rogan. So that's pretty much my take on it all. I mean, I guess I don't really have an in-depth analysis of the podcast just because, if you've been following Paul Saladino, you don't really, there's nothing new on the podcast other than he's exposing all this great information now to wider audience, and a lot of that audience are just too pea-brained to really understand it all. Like, so many comments on there were like, yeah, I've never had to rewind Joe Rogan's podcast as many times in the first 10 minutes as I have with this one because it's too much science for my brain. Like, it's just obvious, to me these days that so many people are too stupid to like take in new information. That's just the way it is. And so I'm trying not to let that discourage me from posting my own videos. But anyway, tell me what you guys thought. Did you all watch the podcast of Joe Rogan? Let me know down in the comments.